Imagine a peaceful Midwestern wheat field right at the turn of the 20th century.
Oh, yeah, the classic American image.
Exactly. Picture the golden hour. The sun is just starting to dip below the horizon, casting these, long amber shadows across the plains.
Right.
And moving through this vast ocean of grain is this brand new, clanking, hissing marvel of modern engineering, a mechanical reaper.
The cutting edge of technology for the time.
It really was. This machine is an absolute titan. It efficiently cuts and automatically bundles the wheat, completely transforming what used to be backbreaking manual labor into this smooth, solitary, mechanized dance.
It's the picture of progress.
It is the future. But I want you to freeze that image in your mind.
Yeah.
Just stop the machine.
Okay.
Zoom in on the gears and look closely at the bundles of wheat it's leaving behind in the dirt. Specifically, look at the twine binding those bundles together.
That's the crucial detail.
We are going to trace that single piece of rough, stiff twine all the way down the map. We're going to pull that thread out of the American Midwest, trace it past the Gulf of Mexico, and drag it into the dense, sweltering heat of the Yucatan Peninsula in southern Mexico.
Because that twine wasn't just made of any random fiber.
Right. It was made of a specific agave plant called Henequen. And at the exact moment that mechanical reaper was celebrating American agricultural bounty in the north, that Henequen was being harvested by human hands under conditions of brutal inherited bondage in the south.
It's a staggering contrast, and it really forces a complete reevaluation of how we view technological progress in this era.
It really does. Welcome to this deep dive, by the way. Our mission today is to unpack a massive, deeply sobering historical dossier covering the period right after 1898.
Right, because we have a deeply ingrained habit of looking at the end product of a supply chain. The neatly bundled wheat, the packaged sugar, and completely ignoring the origin point.
Yes, the invisible labor.
Yeah.
And our sources today detail how United States corporate capital systematically dismantled the agricultural frameworks of the Caribbean and the Yucatan.
They forcibly reassembled them into single-crop economies, monocultures.
Exactly. And we have a towering stack of documentation here. Peer-reviewed papers from the Hispanic American Historical Review, complex economic working papers, government treaties, and a genuinely explosive piece of undercover muckraking journalism from 1910.
It's a dense dossier.
It is. So, okay, let's unpack this, because we are not going to limit ourselves to reading corporate balance sheets today.
No, absolutely not.
We are going to focus on the severe, inescapable physical toll this system exacted, the human collateral that fueled these continent-spanning industries.
Well, to understand the sheer scale of that bodily toll, we have to establish the tectonic geopolitical shift that made it possible.
The year 1898.
Exactly. The year 1898 is the absolute hinge point of this dossier. The Spanish-American War concludes, Spain's centuries-old colonial empire just disintegrates, and the United States announces its arrival as an imperial power.
Right. The U.S. takes direct possession of Puerto Rico, occupies Cuba, and just asserts overwhelming dominance.
But, this new brand of American empire wasn't primarily driven by planting flags or building military garrisons.
No, it's corporate.
Highly corporate. It was spearheaded by Wall Street capital seeking total control over highly profitable commodities, specifically sugar and fiber.
Which brings us to the core concept, monoculture as a system of total, inescapable control.
Yes. We are analyzing a regional transformation where entire nations are reduced to massive factories producing one single crop.
Where the most fertile land is foreign-owned and the local workforce is deliberately bound by inescapable debt and the relentless agricultural calendar. Let's sit with that concept for a moment.
It's a heavy paradigm.
It really is. It means a region literally loses the capacity to feed itself. It trades agricultural independence for corporate dependence. And the most illuminating case study for this is Cuba.
Cuba is the blueprint. Following the 1898 occupation, American capital didn't just trickle into the island. It flooded the Cuban economy like a tidal wave.
It reads like a gold rush, but the gold was sucrose.
A highly organized, well-financed gold rush. This wasn't a chaotic scramble. It was the deliberate deployment of massive Wall Street-backed corporate power.
Like the Cuban-American Sugar Company.
Precisely. Organized in 1899 by R.B. Hawley, this corporation represented a fundamental shift. To grasp it, consider Cuban sugar production before 1898.
It was mostly local planters, right?
Yeah, exactly. They grew their own cane on modestly sized plots and processed it themselves using older, smaller-scale mills called ingenios.
So it was decentralized, locally owned.
Right, and that allowed for a degree of agricultural diversity around the edges of the estates. The profits, however unequal, stayed on the island.
But then Hawley and his Wall Street peers arrive. And they aren't interested in a decentralized system. They want the whole board.
They systematically bought out those local planters. The Cuban-American Sugar Company acquired tens of thousands of acres, creating these vast corporate estates called latifundia,
And the old ingenios.
rendered obsolete immediately. In their place, they constructed centrales. These were colossal, hyper-modern industrial milling complexes.
With the latest crushing machinery, massive boiling houses, even private railway networks.
Yes, and they built entirely insulated enclave towns for the imported American managers. Paved roads, tennis courts, electrified housing.
Meanwhile, the local Cuban population in the eastern provinces gets systematically pushed off their independent farms.
Exactly, because the expanding latifundia absorbed every available acre of arable land.
So in just a few years, an entire class of independent farmers is downgraded into a desperate pool of landless wage laborers.
Entirely dependent on the centrales for survival.
Now this raises a massive logistical red flag for me. Wall Street is notoriously risk-averse.
Oh, absolutely.
A syndicate of American investors is not going to pour millions into building a state-of-the-art central in a newly independent, potentially volatile country without an ironclad guarantee.
They needed an insurance policy.
Right. And looking at the timeline, that insurance policy was clearly the Platt Amendment.
The Platt Amendment is the geopolitical bedrock of this entire economic structure, passed by the U.S. Congress in 1901.
It fundamentally redefined the concept of national sovereignty.
It did. After the war, the U.S. officially recognized Cuba as an independent nation. They had a constitution, an elected government, a flag.
But the Platt Amendment hollowed out the core of that independence.
The U.S. government flatly demanded that the stipulations of the amendment be inserted directly into the new Cuban constitution. It was non-negotiable.
Let's break down the mechanics of those stipulations because they are breathtaking. The amendment explicitly grants the United States the legal right to intervene militarily in Cuban affairs.
At its own discretion.
Right, to preserve a government, quote, adequate for the protection of life, property, and individual liberty. Property being the operative word.
It's an incredible paradox.
It's like someone agreeing to purchase your home, handing you the deed, but forcing you to sign a contract stating they have the legal right to sleep in the master bedroom.
Yes, and store their valuables in your safe.
And if they don't like what you cook for dinner, they can legally break down the front door with an armed security team and replace you with a new chef.
The analogy holds up perfectly. You possess the theoretical title to the house, but you have no functional sovereignty.
So for the architects of the Cuban-American Sugar Company, this was the ultimate market signal.
It assured Wall Street that sinking unimaginable capital into the latifundia was a safe bet. The U.S. military was legally deputized to protect that investment.
And it was paired with a reciprocity treaty favoring Cuban sugar imports to the U.S., right?
Exactly. It structurally bound the Cuban economy to American consumption. If workers attempted to strike, the U.S. government could just deploy the Marines to restore order.
Cuba was rendered a protectorate, in fact, operating for absentee landlords.
Yes.
So the political architecture is set. The latifundia have swallowed the land.
Yes.
Now we have to pivot our focus to the human beings actually living inside this system.
Yeah.
Because our objective is to examine the physical toll.
What did this mean for the displaced Cuban laborer?
Exactly. Waking up every morning in the shadow of the central.
Well, the devastating reality reveals itself when we examine the agricultural rhythm of sugarcane. Sugarcane is a tyrannical crop.
It dictates time.
It does. During the harvest season, from late fall to early spring, the demand for labor is practically infinite.
Because once the cane matures, the sucrose drops if it isn't harvested quickly, right?
Yes. It must be cut by machete with blistering speed. During the Zafra, the central runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Backbreaking labor in punishing tropical heat.
An all-consuming frenzy of productivity. But sugarcane doesn't grow overnight.
Once the Zafra concludes, the fields are cleared and the new crop needs months to mature.
And that biological reality plunges the workforce into the tiempo muerto, the dead season.
The dead season, that just sounds ominous.
From late spring to late summer, the massive centrales fall entirely silent. The private trains stop running. The insatiable demand for labor drops to absolute zero.
I'm trying to visualize the economic fallout.
Yeah.
Today, seasonal employment is like, summer landscaping. It's supplemental.
Right. But in eastern Cuba, under the latifundia, we are talking about the primary economic engine of an entire region just switching off.
The wages vanish. And since the corporations bought all the arable land, the workers have no small plots to cultivate their own food anymore.
That is the crucial mechanism that turned the tiempo muerto into a humanitarian catastrophe.
Because monoculture abhors diversity.
Exactly. Every square inch of fertile soil was for sucrose. When wages ceased, hundreds of thousands of laborers had no financial reserves and no land.
So we were talking about an engineered famine, an entire population left to starve for months, predictably, every single year. But I have to push back on the corporate logic here. Even from the most sociopathic spreadsheet perspective, how does starving your workforce make business sense?
It seems counterintuitive.
If your cane cutters are passing out from caloric deficits, the mill loses money. How did the accountants justify this?
The brutal truth is that the cyclical starvation was highly economically functional. It was a mechanism of absolute leverage.
The reserve army of labor.
Exactly. By allowing the workforce to face profound desperation during the dead season, the corporations guaranteed that when the Zafra resumed, those workers would be waiting at the gates, willing to accept rock-bottom wages.
They were in no position to negotiate.
They would endure the grueling hours because the alternative was returning to the famine. The starvation kept labor artificially cheap.
And it kept the workforce transient, right? Wandering looking for work.
Which prevented them from forming strong community bonds or organizing effective labor unions. They actively manipulated the biological rhythms of the worker's body.
They weaponized hunger as a management tool. That is chilling.
It is.
Now, regarding the sheer scale of this dominance, there's a widely circulated statistic that by the 1920s, U.S. corporate interests owned 75% of Cuba's land.
Yes, that number comes up constantly.
But our dossier flags this number as a point of serious contention among historians. Where does that 75% figure even come from?
It usually emerges in discussions about the 1920 economic collapse, notoriously known in Cuba as the Dance of the Millions.
Okay, I need a breakdown of that. How do we get to a collapse called the Dance of the Millions?
It begins with World War I. The conflict devastated the European beet sugar industry. Global supply plummeted, so the price of Cuban cane sugar skyrocketed.
Triggering a massive speculative bubble.
Right. Everyone from American syndicates to local Cuban elites began borrowing heavily from Wall Street banks like National City Bank to plant more cane. Capital flowed so freely it was dubbed the Dance of the Millions.
But bubbles burst.
In 1920, the European beet fields recovered, supply stabilized, and the price of sugar collapsed almost overnight.
And the creditors come collecting. The Cuban producers who borrowed suddenly have no revenue to service their debts.
Exactly. Wall Street banks foreclosed on millions of acres of prime sugar land and dozens of centrales.
Deepening direct American ownership.
Yes, and it's in the wake of these foreclosures that people began citing the 75% statistic.
But the National Bureau of Economic Research papers in our dossier push back on the accuracy of that. Are they suggesting the U.S. didn't control the economy?
No serious historian disputes the overwhelming U.S. hegemony. The debate centers on the methodological precision of that specific metric.
What exactly is being measured?
Right. Are we talking 75% of the total square mileage of Cuba, including mountains and swamps, arable land?
Or maybe milling capacity?
Exactly. Some scholars suggest the figure originated as a measurement of total raw sugar output, which was sloppily translated into physical land ownership.
That makes perfect sense. I mean, if a corporation owns the only modern central and the only railway to the port, they effectively control 100% of the economic output of that province.
The precise acreage is a pedantic distinction.
Right. If you're a Cuban cane cutter facing the starvation of the tiempo muerto, the distinction between Wall Street owning 45% versus 75% of the land is meaningless.
The functional reality of the monopoly remains identical. U.S. capital held a stranglehold over the island's economic lifeline.
Okay, so we've established the blueprint in Cuba. Massive land consolidation, industrial centrales, political protection, and the weaponization of the tiempo muerto.
And that capital is going to look for new frontiers to expand.
Exactly. Which leads us east, across the Caribbean, to Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico provides a crucial comparative lens. It shows this was a systemic regional strategy. But the geopolitical context was distinctly different.
Because Puerto Rico wasn't nominally independent, it was annexed directly by the U.S.
Yes, an unincorporated possession.
So there isn't even the illusion of a sovereign government. The U.S. Congress has direct control. You'd assume that might lead to better protections for the locals, but the dossier introduces the Sugar Trust.
The Sugar Trust refers to the massive absentee American corporations that dominated Puerto Rico. Entities like Central Aguirre, the Fajardo Sugar Company.
And the South Puerto Rico Sugar Company at Guanica.
Right. They leveraged massive capital to systematically acquire the absolute best, most productive alluvial coastal plains on the island.
Fundamentally altering the ecological makeup, because before 1898, Puerto Rico was famous for coffee in the mountains, not sugar on the coast.
Exactly. They had a robust, diversified agricultural sector, but the financial gravity of the Sugar Trust pivoted the entire island's economic axis entirely toward coastal sugarcane monoculture.
Now, reading the legal documents here, I came across something baffling. When Congress passed the 4-Acre Act in 1900, they included a legal provision restricting any single corporation from owning more than 500 acres of land.
Ah, the 500-acre limitation, one of the most glaring examples of legal hypocrisy in this era.
It doesn't make sense. The legislative intent was to prevent massive latifundia. But a massive industrial central can't operate profitably on just 500 acres.
They need tens of thousands of acres.
So how did the South Puerto Rico Sugar Company build an empire? Did they repeal the law?
They didn't need to. They simply ignored it through sophisticated financial engineering. The 500-acre limit existed strictly on paper.
How did they get around it?
Armies of corporate lawyers constructed labyrinthine webs of proxy companies and subsidiary holding companies.
So a single parent corporation would create 50 different shell companies.
Exactly. Each technically owning 499 acres, all feeding cane to the same central mill.
Wow. Operating vast estates with absolute impunity.
It's a stark illustration of how absentee corporate capital bypassed legal frameworks, operating as a de facto sovereign power.
The sheer arrogance of it. The law is window dressing while the reality is unchecked corporate feudalism. And this drive for cheap labor doesn't stop at Puerto Rico. It moves to the Dominican Republic.
The Dominican Republic is the third major pillar, and the expansion there accelerated dramatically as a direct consequence of brute military force.
The U.S. Marines occupied the DR from 1916 until 1924.
Precisely. We escalate from a treaty in Cuba to annexation in Puerto Rico to a full-scale military occupation in the DR.
And under that protective umbrella, the capital flows in.
The same South Puerto Rico Sugar Company aggressively expanded into the DR, establishing the massive La Romana complex.
But the dossier highlights a critical shift in labor dynamics there. In Cuba and Puerto Rico, they exploited the displaced local populations.
Yes.
In the DR, they started systematically importing Haitian cane cutters.
Yes.
Why the shift? Is there a labor shortage or a darker logic at play?
It is entirely driven by wage suppression and control. Migrant laborers crossing an international border represent the ultimate vulnerable workforce.
Because they have no local social networks or legal protections.
Exactly. By importing Haitian braceros, the corporations drove labor costs even lower. If they protest, they can be immediately dismissed, evicted, and deported.
And it fractures the bargaining power of the local Dominican workforce,
creating a divided, easily exploitable labor pool.
So, pulling the lens back across the Caribbean, we have 3 different political statuses, but the exact same economic outcome. Foreign-owned monoculture, displaced local agriculture, and a workforce trapped in the punishing seasonal cycle of the cane and the starvation of the tiempo muerto.
A perfectly calibrated machine for extracting wealth.
But up until now, we've been focused entirely on sugar, the sweet end of the American diet. Now, I want to signal a major transition. We are moving away from the Caribbean to the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico.
Moving from a crop you consume to a crop that dictates whether you eat at all.
Henequen.
Henequen is one of the most structurally critical yet forgotten commodities of the early 20th century. It's a robust agave plant, indigenous to the harsh limestone soils of the Yucatan.
And the fibers were so valuable they called it oro verde, green gold.
Yes.
Who is buying agave fiber with such desperation? This brings us back to the mechanical reaper in the Midwestern wheat field.
The supply chain connection.
Exactly. Agricultural technology is revolutionizing the global food supply. Reapers are harvesting wheat at an industrial scale, but they had a critical vulnerability, the knotter mechanism.
It had to automatically bundle and tie the wheat.
And it required twine. Cotton was too weak. Wire would jam the gears. It had to be rough, stiff, and cheap.
And Henequen fiber perfectly met every single engineering requirement. It was the indispensable linchpin of the North American wheat harvest.
Without it, The harvest grinds to a halt. It's the ultimate invisible supply chain. It's like modern electric vehicles.
Yeah.
We praise the green tech, completely disconnected from the brutal lithium extraction half a world away.
The technological marvel masks the extraction at the origin. The American farmer driving his reaper never thought about the Yucatan.
But his prosperity was inextricably bound to the labor there. And that origin point was controlled by a ruthless monopoly, International Harvester.
The colossal U.S. Farm Machinery Trust.
They realized their business model was vulnerable. If they can't get cheap twine, they can't sell machines, so they decide to corner the Henequen market. But they need local leverage.
Exactly. They
Yeah.
needed a proxy. In October 1902, Harvester entered into a highly classified pact with a powerful Mexican export house, Molina y Compañía.
Establishing a monopsony. Only one buyer. How did that function on the ground?
Harvester provided Oligario Molina with millions of dollars in secret financial backing. Molina used that war chest to artificially inflate prices temporarily to bankrupt his competitors.
Or just buy them out?
Right. Once he eliminated the competition, he became the sole conduit for Henequen. And per the secret pact, he then drastically slashed the price paid to the independent Henequen growers, the hacendados.
Harvester gets cheap twine, Molina gets obscenely wealthy. But Molina wasn't just a businessman.
No, the concentration of power is staggering. He achieved a triple threat status.
He was the leading corporate exporter, but he was also the state governor of the Yucatan.
And later, the federal minister of development under President Porfirio Diaz.
The ultimate fusion of corporate monopoly and state power. If a grower wants to complain about the low prices, they appeal to the governor, who is Molina.
Or the development minister, who is also Molina. They were completely trapped in a rigged system.
And those hacendados weren't going to just absorb the financial losses. They passed that pressure downwards, squeezing the only variable they could still control.
Their labor force.
Which brings us to the darkest section of this dossier. If sugar relied on seasonal starvation, Henequen relied on something arguably more insidious: perpetual bondage, debt peonage.
The Henequen haciendas were massive, isolated fiefdoms. The workforce was primarily indigenous Maya laborers, and the profound horror of this system is its bureaucratic facade.
It relies on a ledger, not physical chains. How does the trap snap shut?
It almost always began with a cash advance. A Maya worker might need a small sum for a burial, a wedding, or medicine. The hacendado provides the advance, recording it in the ledger.
And the moment that ink dries, the worker is legally bound to the hacienda.
Until the debt is repaid. But the entire ecosystem was meticulously engineered to guarantee mathematically that the debt could never be repaid.
Because wages were kept artificially low.
Yes, but the true instrument of enslavement was the tienda de raya, the company store. They were rarely paid in actual currency, mostly in proprietary scrip.
Which could only be redeemed at the company store, where prices for basic necessities were vastly inflated.
Exactly. So simply by consuming enough calories to survive the labor, the workers' expenses exceeded their wages. They fell deeper into debt every single day.
An endless treadmill. They could labor for 20 years and owe more than the day they started.
They could literally never buy their freedom.
But what happens when the worker dies? Does the ledger clear?
It does not. The debt was inheritable property. If a father died owing 500 pesos, his sons automatically inherited that debt.
Children born into ledgers they would never escape. A multi-generational cycle.
And we cannot pretend this was merely abstract economic captivity. The ledgers were enforced by severe physical violence.
Right. If a worker attempts to flee, they are hunted.
The hacendados maintained private armed security. And because Molina controlled the governorship, the state police routinely functioned as slave catchers.
Floggings, beatings, private jails, a closed system of terror. But the demand for twine was expanding. The local Maya population wasn't large enough to satisfy Chicago's factories.
The system needed more bodies.
Which leads us to the horrifying events of 1908, the Yaqui deportations.
To understand this, we have to look to the northwestern state of Sonora. The federal government under Diaz had been engaged in a brutal war of extermination against the indigenous Yaqui people.
To forcibly dispossess them of their ancestral lands for foreign agricultural investment.
Yes, and by 1908, the government implemented a policy of mass deportation, ethnic cleansing. Captured Yaqui families were loaded into train cars, shipped across the Gulf of Mexico, and literally sold off to the Henequen hacendados at a set price per head.
Shipped from the arid north to the sweltering Yucatan jungle, sold like cattle, surrounded by guards with whips. It is the federal government functioning as an armed staffing agency for a corporate monopoly.
But remarkably, this sprawling system of atrocities did not remain hidden.
Enter John Kenneth Turner.
An American investigative journalist, he heard rumors of this slavery from Mexican political exiles in Los Angeles and decided to verify it himself.
And he executed this incredibly dangerous undercover operation.
He did. He traveled to the Yucatan in 1908, posing as a wealthy American capitalist looking to invest in a Henequen plantation.
So the hacendados completely dropped their guard.
Completely. They welcomed him into their homes. They didn't hide the brutality. They proudly showcased it as efficiency. They bragged about the profitability of the ledgers, showed him the whips, discussed purchasing deported Yaqui families.
They handed him the smoking gun because they thought he was just another Wall Street proxy looking to cash in.
Exactly. Turner documented every conversation and transaction, took the evidence back, and published a series of explosive articles compiled into the 1910 book Barbarous Mexico.
What was the fallout?
It deeply shocked the American public, who were oblivious that their daily bread was tied to such atrocities. But more crucially, it irreparably discredited the Diaz regime internationally.
Stripping away the polished veneer of the great modernizer.
It's no coincidence the book was published in 1910, the exact year the Mexican Revolution erupted. The visceral anger was a significant fuel for that fire.
We have covered an immense expanse of history today. The Caribbean islands, the Yucatan, sugar, and Henequen. I want to ask you to draw a direct comparison between these two systems of labor control.
It's a critical analytical comparison. Both achieve the exact same corporate objective, an ultra-cheap workforce, but through fundamentally different mechanisms.
Let's look at the sugar industry first.
Sugar functioned through temporary, cyclical discarding. The cane required a massive army for the harvest, but the corporations refused to sustain them year-round.
So they cast them out into the tiempo muerto.
Engineered starvation. They knew the trauma of famine would force the workers back, desperate and compliant. Control through the weaponization of hunger.
Threatening them with the abyss for 6 months of the year?
Yes. Conversely, the Henequen industry functioned through perpetual retention. Henequen leaves can be harvested continuously. The labor demand was constant.
So they needed a system to physically hold the workforce captive every single day.
Exactly. Not cyclical layoffs, but the inescapable trap of debt peonage. Manipulated ledgers, inflated company stores, inherited debts, and brute force.
One uses the blunt instrument of seasonal starvation. The other deploys the suffocating permanence of inescapable debt. Which brings us to a tense debate within the scholarly sources.
The terminology debate.
Turner did not mince words. He called the Henequen system outright slavery. Yet, modern economic historians debate the use of that specific term. Are they suggesting Turner exaggerated?
No, the debate does not minimize the cruelty. Turner used the word slavery because the physical realities, buying humans per head, routine floggings, were functionally indistinguishable from chattel slavery.
So what's the issue?
Modern historians analyzing the debt contracts argue that applying the broad label of slavery obscures the specific, insidious mechanics of the system.
Because technically under Mexican law, they weren't legally classified as property.
Right. The Maya peon possessed a theoretical legal existence as a citizen entering into a labor contract. The argument is we must classify it as highly coerced contract labor.
Because calling it simple slavery lets us ignore how modern legal instruments like contracts and credit were manipulated to recreate the exact conditions of slavery.
Precisely, without technically violating the Constitution.
I understand the academic necessity for rigorous classification. But, placing myself in the shoes of the people who lived it, does that legal distinction hold any water whatsoever?
It's a fair question.
If you're a Maya laborer being beaten because you tried to walk off the plantation, does it matter that your oppressor is technically a creditor rather than a slave owner?
It really doesn't.
If your infant child inherits a debt they can never repay, it feels like a distinction without a difference to the person holding the machete.
That is a powerful and entirely valid critique of the academic framing. Acknowledging the legal mechanics must never sanitize the undeniable cruelty of the system.
It was slavery by a different name.
Yes. The academic debate simply forces us to recognize that tyranny sometimes arrives dressed in the respectable clothing of contract law.
Now, one final debate regarding International Harvester. Given their massive capital injection, were they the puppet masters who invented this debt peonage system.
No, claiming they invented it is an oversimplification. International Harvester provided the immense financial fuel and guaranteed the market demand.
But the company store and the reliance on coerced indigenous labor were already deeply entrenched local customs in Mexico.
Exactly. Harvester didn't have to invent the whip or the inherited ledger. They entered into a dark, symbiotic partnership with the pre-existing local oligarchy, the Molina family, and the authoritarian Diaz state.
They just accelerated that existing brutality to an unprecedented industrial scale.
Yes, to meet the demands of the global wheat market. Foreign corporate capital leveraging entrenched local power to maximize extraction.
We have covered a tremendous amount of ground today. We've examined how United States capital systematically transformed diverse landscapes into monolithic single-crop colonies.
A profound transformation.
From the devastating engineered seasonal starvation of the Cuban sugar workers to the relentless multi-generational inherited debt of the Maya peons. The overarching reality is that the celebrated economic efficiencies of this system,
The cheap sugar, the abundant binder twine.
right, they were directly subsidized by the immense physical toll extracted from millions of human bodies.
That must be the essential takeaway. When we study these macro-historical supply chains, we are fundamentally studying systems meticulously designed to extract maximum financial value from human labor.
While simultaneously denying those laborers basic bodily autonomy and economic dignity. And to you listening right now, I want to emphasize that this is not just dusty, irrelevant history.
It forces a reckoning.
It really does. Every time we pull back the curtain on a historical supply chain, it forces us to remember that economic miracles almost always hide profound human costs. We spent this time looking at how a secret corporate pact in 1902 dictated whether people thousands of miles away ate or starved.
It makes you think about today.
Exactly. It makes you wonder.
Yeah.
When you buy a seamlessly packaged, incredibly cheap product today, a technological marvel delivered to your front door in 2 days with a careless click of a button, what invisible tiempo muertos are hidden in that modern supply chain?
What modern cycles of inescapable debt are operating in the background?
Who exactly is bearing the physical toll for our convenience right now? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
Thank you for listening.